Long time ago, I did a explaining the faith talk on forgiveness. And you've heard me say from time to time that forgiveness is not as hard as we think, because forgiveness, you've heard me say many times, is not required of you to reconcile with somebody. If somebody has damaged you or is a threat to you or it causes a lot of problems, you're not required. I use the example of my ex-employee back in North Carolina who stole $2,000 from me. Yes, I'm required to forgive him, but I fired him. Said, don't let me ever see you around here again. Not required to take him out to dinner and to be his best friend. Forgiveness is just simply letting go, not wishing ill on anyone, but just letting go. However, mercy is greater than forgiveness. And so one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard that takes forgiveness to a different level is one I think I've only mentioned once before, but I'd like to share with you, is the most incredible story I've ever heard that isn't just forgiveness, but takes it to the level of reconciliation, which we're not required in one essence, but God does. God, when we go into the confessional, it's not called the sacrament of forgiveness. It's called the sacrament of reconciliation. He could forgive us and just say, now get out of my sight. I forgive you, but go. But he doesn't. He reconciles us back to himself. This story is was the World Apostolic Congress on Mercy way back in 2014. And it shows how amazing forgiveness is, but more powerful, how it can lead to mercy. It's the story of Pastora Mira Garcia. She's from Colombia. And her father was murdered when she was just a little girl. The drug cartels, which finally are now being addressed. But her father was murdered, as I said, when she was just a little girl. Then when she was 18, she married and she had a child. But when her daughter was only 2 months old, her husband was killed, was murdered. Years later, she had a 22-year-old daughter, another 22-year-old daughter, that same girl, I'm sorry. So that same daughter, because her husband was killed when the daughter was only 2 months. Years later, that girl grew up, and when she was 22 years old, she was kidnapped. And during 9 months of captivity, this mother never ceased to pray, to trust God, search for her daughter, but she eventually learned that her daughter had been killed. So I think of what this woman's gone through. When she was young, a little girl, her father's killed. Then she gets married, has a little baby, and her husband is killed. Then this baby grows up to be a 22-year-old young lady, and she's kidnapped, and she is killed. Pastora then sought to find the remains of her daughter. And when she was searching, she found several other bodies that were murdered. This is how these drug cartels are. I mean, for us to be against trying to eliminate these cartels is not justice. Justice is to eliminate these cartels. But in her search, she found several bodies. And horrifying as it was, this gave her some peace, some closure, helping other mothers find the remains of their children that they just didn't know what happened to them. I mean, that's awful, trying to not have at least some closure. It's certainly terrible to learn that their fate, but to not know is every bit, if not more terrible. And so it gave peace and closure in one sense, helping these other mothers find the remains. So at last, Pastora found the remains of her daughter and she buried her daughter. But then her faith was tested when her son was then kidnapped by a paramilitary group. Can you imagine living like this? So then her son was kidnapped. And after weeks of suffering unimaginable tortures, her son's body was found. Pastora said that despite her pain, the only thing that kept her going was her faith in God. Not understanding it, but trusting. Trusting. So a few days after the burial of her son, Pastora found a man who was badly hurt, still alive, lying on the side of the road, near the same place where her son had been found dead. So without hesitation, she took this man home and started to care for him. She tended his wounds. And when he was there and she was dressing his wounds, she was caring for the stranger. This man looked up and saw a picture of her dead son on the wall and said, "Do you know this man? We killed him last week." Pastora said she felt her world collapse. But she kept asking the Blessed Virgin to cover her ears to the words of this man and not let her heart be filled with hate. Pastora begged Mary to help her forgive because the hatred was coming out. So she begged Mary to help her forgive those who killed her son. And so Pastora, with love and dedication, continued to care for the murderer of her child. She said that she loved this man, and she began not just treating him that day in her house, she actually began a relationship, not romantic, but caring for this man. And then she said over time she loved this man so much that several years later, when he was unfortunately killed, she felt like the loss of her own child. Not only did she forgive, she reconciled and had mercy. This is why mercy is greater than forgiveness. Forgiveness is letting go. Mercy is reconciling. And so what our faith teaches us is we are required to forgive. And sometimes that's where it should be left. Maybe it's better that it's left. Just you go your way, I go my way. I pray for you. I wish you well. You go your way. I pray, you pray for me. I wish you well. But other times, it's reconciled. It's brought together. And so forgiveness we're required to do. But when we're merciful, we're most like Jesus. Passage 1148 in the diary of St. Faustina, which Brother John will read here. Passage 1148 basically says we most resemble Jesus when we forgive, and that we're required to do. But we most, the Beatitudes tell us, is when we are merciful. You know, forgiveness is one of the most serious sins because even God can't forgive us if we don't forgive others. It's in the Our Father prayer. And as I said, it's not as difficult as we think. Yeah, like I said, you don't have to remain best friends with somebody who murdered your child. But Pastora did. The problem still has to be addressed. It doesn't mean that you're just unconditionally, accepting. That's license. You can't just accept injustice or something that's bad done to you. This is where we had, I learned about a priest that somebody was injured in a malpractice suit, and the doctor was drunk. And the doctor paralyzed the patient, cut a nerve in the spinal cord. The doctor was intoxicated and cut the nerve and paralyzed the individual. And a priest instructed them that they cannot take legal action because that's not forgiveness. That is absolutely wrong. There comes a time where there has to be justice. That doctor needed to be held accountable. That is not against Catholic teaching, that paralyzed man could not take a lawsuit out for the malpractice. That is not Catholic Church teaching. So if we just say, oh, no matter what you do, there's no consequences, that's license. That's wrong too. That's false mercy. It's kind of like somebody saying, well, I'm living in sin, but I can't say anything to them because then I'm not being merciful. No, that's false mercy. You must correct people. Now, we do it in love, but we must correct. That's a work of mercy. Admonish the sinner. And so forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. We don't have to pretend we're not hurt. That is not forgiveness. That's lying. The human mind is incredible, but it can't forget at will. It's not. The human mind, it does not have the ability to forget at will. Forgiveness is not denying the reality of our pain. So we always have to address the problem. And again, maybe it's better sometimes if you had an abusive relationship and the spouse beat you and physically harmed you, then no, the church doesn't say you're required to stay with that person. Even in the cases of marriages, the church teaches separation may be needed. And so always address the problem, but with love, or at least wish them no harm, but go their way. So again, what is forgiveness? It's letting go, not wishing ill on the other. Here's the important part. Forgiveness is needed on the natural level, where societies could not exist at all because there wouldn't be any harmony if there wasn't forgiveness of different things. But mercy takes things to a supernatural level because it doesn't just forgive, it reconciles. So that's why mercy is greater than forgiveness. You've heard me say to forgive is, that said, I've changed that old adage. To me, to forgive is human. To be merciful is divine. Because the forgiveness is on the natural level. To err is human, to forgive is divine. That's the old expression. I believe it's to forgive is human, to be merciful is divine. So God just doesn't forgive us and tell us to go on our way. He has mercy on us. And this is why we call it, as I said, the sacrament of reconciliation. It goes beyond forgiveness. No matter how much someone has hurt us or owes us, we have hurt God and owe God more. Again, not saying that you have to be best friends with somebody who's really not good or has hurt you or abused you. But to not forgive them, no matter what they've done to you, nobody is worth losing your soul. You all know the story of my mom. My mom refused to forgive her mother. Her mother used to beat her and to the point where my mom got water on the brain. And my mom refused to forgive her. And she got Alzheimer's. And all of you prayed for my mom. And this miracle from stage 4 Alzheimer's, which is never you recover from, she recovered for like a 2-month period. And it was just enough time for God's grace to work in her, to forgive her mother. And then she went back to full-blown Alzheimer's. To me, that is the greatest miracle that has ever happened in my life. Obviously, other than the Eucharist, which is the biggest miracle that happens every day. But a non-sacramental miracle, that's the biggest miracle that ever happened in my life, was your prayers, allowing my mom to become lucid again after being completely out of it, just enough time to forgive her mother, then she died. I guarantee you, God allowed that for her salvation. And that's a miracle. So trust me, unforgiveness hurts you more than them. Nobody's worth losing your soul. Nobody. So in the end, it can keep us from heaven, and nobody is worth losing your soul. So I told my mom, it's ironic that grandma who hurt you, she said, I didn't do anything. I said, Mom, I know that. Grandma did. You didn't. You were just a little girl. And she said, but I didn't do anything. I can't forgive her. She did it. Remember, forgiveness is not conditioned on whether they did something or not. Forgiveness is required by us to be like Christ. And so it's ironic that I said to my mom that grandma could end up in heaven and you could be lost. And she got upset. She's like, Grandma's the one who did it. Yes, Mom, but Grandma repented. Grandma asked for forgiveness. Grandma was sorry. She can be in heaven. But if you refuse to forgive her, didn't expect Mom to have to be even reconciled to her own mother, to even be best friends with her own mother. I never told my mom she had to do that. But Mom, you have to forgive her. And for years, my mom refused. But then she did. And that's the beautiful gift that, when I told her that you could be lost because if you refuse to give, how ironic. And my mom just really, in many ways, I think is a great example, because God gives us the opportunity to forgive and not forget. Because sometimes we have to be prudent on how we handle relationships in the future. But in no way, shape, or form can we not forgive. So let us ask God today for that grace. Is there anyone you're not forgiving? I said before, when I go in to hear the confessions, there's only two things I stop confessions for. One, using God's name in vain. I need to make sure people understand that, how we have to stop that. And second is a lack of forgiveness. For somebody's abused somebody, I got one person that got mad at me in the confessional. She said, you expect me to be best friends with somebody who beat me? I said, no, I don't. But we can't harbor hatred. There's a difference. So God bless you today, and let us ask God for grace and mercy to be reconciled first back to Him, and then, as this passage tells us, to each other. If you bring your gift to the altar and there recall your brother has anything against you, leave your gift there at the altar. Go first and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Settle with your opponent quickly while on the way to court. Otherwise, your opponent will hand you over to the judge. The judge will hand you to the guard, and the guard will throw you in prison. Amen, I say to you, you will not be released until you have paid the last penny. So there's our answer. Be reconciled before it goes to prison. God bless you.